So the reason I chose Neurometric was it just seemed to have this combination. Basically, my rule was I would go back and be an operator if I felt like something could be really, really big. And I think inference, AI inference, as a category is going to be one of the biggest markets in the history of the world.
And that's where kind of the rubber meets the road. And then we'll get to like how you're going to sort of next create a product to help companies then really optimize their inference.
What's coming is a tool that monitors your AI traffic, your AI workloads, right? Your prompts that go in and out. And what's interesting about moving to small language models or other similar task-focused models, let's call them, is that they could literally be the trifecta, which if you have a well-defined task, they could be faster and cheaper and more accurate than using the biggest and best models. And so
in this episode, I talked to Rob May, founder and CEO of Neurometric AI. He is doing some of the most interesting and profound things when it comes to AI inference. And that's important because AI is so expensive in the enterprise, and in order to make the ROI work, companies have to bring down the costs. Neurometric is doing that by using small models and thinking algorithms and optimizing them for specific workloads, which can save a lot of money and sometimes even improve performance at the same time. I think you're going to appreciate hearing about how Neurometric is pulling that off. I also talked to Rob about why the AI boom got him back into operating a startup after he'd moved into investing following multiple exits earlier in his career. And another thing I think you might enjoy is our conversation about how startup founders can get journalists to cover their companies. Rob and I talk about a conversation he and I had when he was doing his first startup that ended up turning into an article I wrote that changed the trajectory of that business. So here it is, our conversation with Rob May of Neurometric AI. So Rob May, you are a startup founder who's had multiple exits, and you're now working on AI with Neurometric AI. One of the things I want to talk about, there's a lot of things that I want to talk about with you, but one of the things I want to talk about is how you choose, what you work on, because you certainly could work on a lot of things. But before we get into it, thanks for being on the show.
yeah, thanks for having me, Jason.
Yeah, very good. Well, before we get into exits and AI and all these things, I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about how you and I met, because we go back a long time. I want to say your first startup or one of your early ones I wrote about a long time ago, over a decade ago.
Yeah, first venture backed is how I describe it. I had some businesses before that, but that was my first venture capital backed business. Yeah.
Okay, so your first venture capital backed startup, was how you and I met. So interestingly enough, we have a mutual friend, also a startup founder, Todd Earwood, and I remember Todd saying to me like, hey, there's my buddy Rob, and he had mentioned you before. He had said to me multiple times, you really need to meet Rob. And I was like, okay, yeah. And so he says to me, is coming on the end of the year, and he's like, you really need to talk to Rob. He's got this new thing that he's doing, and I really think it's smart. And yeah, I think you could write about it and really enjoy it. But if not, you just would enjoy meeting him, And so then one way or another, he connected us, and we ended up grabbing lunch, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and we knew some other CNET people in common, I think, right? Like Jay Garman, maybe,
yes.
And a few folks like that, because it was we were both in Louisville, Kentucky. You still are, and I was not, am not anymore. But it was, and the tech community there was relatively small. So
True.
So that was so how we knew some people. So.
That's right. We had some people in common, but that was the first time we met, right? Was when you and I had lunch, whatever, we texted and said, hey, let's, get together. Todd says you had something interesting I should see. And we just had lunch. And the thing that one of the things I love about you that I realized from that first time we met is like, you're just really smart, but you also like give it to me straight, from that very first time. And so I really liked that. And you presented me this idea, which was Backupify, that you were working on. And one of my favorite products, or maybe my favorite startups, are the things when somebody tells you something and you're like, holy crap, why has nobody done that before? Like those are the things that I almost always have this gut reaction to, that I'm like, that's something I will cover or write about. Because if I had that reaction, probably others are going to think the same thing. Like, oh my gosh, why did nobody do this before? And Backupify was this idea at the time. It's going to seem, maybe out of dated now, but it was really interesting at the time. Was we were spreading stuff through all these like social media accounts and other places online. And we were having instances of people like having their stuff erased by accident, like the company just rebooted a server or whatever, and they lost all their stuff. So Backupify was taking all of your cloud accounts and essentially backing them up in one place, right? Am I characterizing it right?
And we started, when you wrote about it, we were still pretty consumer focused. We were doing, we had some mutual friends who were CNET people who had started a company. I think it was called, was it FriendFeed or was it something?
Oh,
no,
yes.
it was Prophylactic, Prophylactic or whatever,
right.
and it was doing a bunch of stuff, so it was stuff like that. So it was a big thing. You had all these online accounts. So this was December of 2009.
Okay.
And I don't know if you know this. I don't know if I ever told you this, Jason, but we almost shut down the company before you wrote about it. So Backupify was a year old, and we were backing up like Gmail accounts, Flickr accounts, all this kind of stuff, and it was hard to get in front of people. And so we had, and we couldn't raise money from VCs because VCs would say, at the time, this was crazy. People aren't going to move their data to the cloud. It's too insecure. So which makes it's crazy to think that they thought that.
Yeah, right.
But
that was the vibe.
After a year of being up and running, we had 2,000 users. Most of them were free. A handful were paying us like $30 a month. And so I talked to the handful of investors we had, and I was like, look, I think we're going to shut this down. But I was begging, like I spent, and I think startup founders should do this, I spent about 20% of my time just like emailing random journalists, like why you should write about us. And most people wouldn't do it. And so when you and I met and you wrote about it, and then it got picked up on Tech Meme, we signed up 10,000 people the next day. And
wow.
And that just led to a boom. And then suddenly and this was right before Christmas.
That's right.
So everybody was busy, and still like VCs were calling me and they're like, what is this company? We're hearing about it everywhere. And like, because it's the interesting thing about the media, right? Is like when you lead with an interesting story, it's like it gets picked up from other places. Totally. And so that's you kind of transformed the face of that company.
That's crazy. You hadn't ever told me that, which is amazing. Todd had sort of said something to me before, because later I can't remember, at some point he's like, you should have him have Rob write you a testimonial, because he's like, he's like this changed everything. So the interesting thing was, I wrote that story. I did the story. I really, when I heard about it, I had that aha moment, like, man, why has nobody thought of this before? And so that's how I wrote it. I wrote it like that. That was probably in the story somewhere. And it was also, like you said, it was mid-December of 2009. The traffic is bad, right? It's a bad time to write tech stories because there's not much going on. But in a sense, that worked in your favor, right? Because you weren't competing with other big tech stories at the time. So that thing went out there, and that story absolutely blew up almost immediately. And much to my surprise, because this was like a late December story that, when traffic is bad, but it got picked up by Tech Meme. I remember my friends at This Week in Tech, like they were asking me about it. They ended up covering it, and they had a huge audience at the time. It was like the leading podcast in tech, on Apple and other platforms. And so, they talked about it a bunch. We got linked to from all over the place. Like literally everybody was linking to that story and re-amplifying it. And so, it was just one of those crazy things that just went pretty wild. And then Backupify, I remember, had this really interesting, journey. But I do remember too, Jason Calacanis like tweeting about it like the day after when it hit Tech Meme.
So he called me. Okay. He called me right after Christmas. I don't know how I got my phone number, but he called me and he proceeded to introduce it, because Jason was not nearly as popular back in 2009 as he is today. He was well known in tech circles, but he was doing this new thing called Open Angel Forum, and the way we raised money was, so he called me and he said, I love what you're doing. I want you to come to LA and pitch at this thing in January called Open Angel Forum that I'm doing. And I was like, hey man, I was like, I saw it, but the application's already closed. He's like, no, we haven't picked the companies. It doesn't matter. I want you there. So I flew out there and did it. And because it was the first Open Angel Forum and he put it together, he had invited all the big time. It was like Chris Sacca was there and Josh Koppelman. And so I got Shervin Pishavar. Like I got to pitch Ron Conway. I got to pitch all of the top investors, early stage investors in the world at that time in one place in LA. And so, we went in there with no money, about to shut down, and we left with a seed round. So
wow.
That was cool.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So yeah, it's one of those crazy things that there's a little bit of luck, there and some serendipity. But, from that, one of the things that I took away, and I followed what you did all the times after that, because I was like, you were really honest with me about like, here's what the product doesn't do, yet, right? Like, and here's what we do. Like we have sort of a narrow remit and we're trying to do it really well. And I respected that a lot. And I respected that you didn't try to like snake oil salesman, the thing. Like you were real honest about, here's what we're about. We think it's pretty interesting. We think there's a real reason, to have this and to do it. And so you made it a really easy story to write about. So for founders out there that are, pitching journalists and stuff of like, don't be a marketing person, right? Like be more like a product person. Cause you spoke to me like a founder, like a product lead, and you were real clear about, what you were trying to accomplish, what the product was trying to do.
I agree, and I think it's gotten even worse, right? Because in a noisier world, I mean, what we're lacking more than ever is authenticity, and I think people want that. I think they want that in their products. I think they want that in their media, and so with all this AI slop now, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And I think you do have to lean in, particularly if you're an experienced product person. I think you can credibly say like, and here's what's coming next, and like, yes, we know how to build products and do stuff because we've done it a lot. And so it doesn't necessarily, it's not a bad thing to foreshadow, what's going on.
Have you ever loved your HR, IT, or payroll software? Yeah, didn't think so. Me neither. Most platforms are stitched together, so when they add AI, there's not much they can do. Deal rebuilt the entire global workforce stack from the ground up. One AI native platform for HR, IT, and payroll. Built in-house, not white labeled. And because it's one system, AI inside Deal can actually do real work. It manages onboarding, payroll, compliance, and approvals, following your policies, workflows, and risk thresholds. You can hire, manage, and pay anyone without juggling tools, logins, or manual handoffs. AI agents take care of the repetitive work, while over 2,000 local experts in 130 countries keep everything compliant. From 5 people to 50,000, Deal scales as you grow. It just works, and you'll actually like using it. See how global work runs when AI is built into the system. Book a demo at del.com/deepview. That's del.com/deepview. Thank you to Deal for their support of the Deep View. That for you was like a launch pad. Like you did that. You eventually sold that company. You had your exit. You did multiple exits, from there. And so, I would love to. You're now, the CEO of this AI company, Neurometric AI. You just came out with your leaderboard on thinking models, which is thinking algorithms. Sorry, I models is still sort of burned into my brain all day. On thinking algorithms, which is really interesting, and we wrote about on the Deep View. And you could have had multiple opportunities. You could have done multiple things. One of the things I just would love to get into with you is, you've had multiple exits. You sort of have your choice of what you want to work on, what you want to spend your time on. How do you figure that out? Because I think that's something that a lot of people that's their aspirational, part. Is they want to get to that point. But it's not always easy when you get to that point, when you have a multiple choices or a lot of choices.
Sometimes it gets harder.
Deciding what, is tough, right? So how do you decide? How did you decide with Neurometric AI? And how did you decide in general? Because obviously you've had that moment at various points in your career.
Yeah, I thought at this point. So we sold Backupify in December 2014. I was 38 years old, so I just thought like, I'm not going to retire, but I'm going to work another 5 or 6 or 7 years, and then I'm going to retire, right? And but the thing that I chose to do next, so I looked around in 2015 at like blockchain, Internet of Things, corporate messaging, because Slack was kind of big, and AI. And I decided like, looks like this AI stuff is really starting to get some legs. And so I've been in AI ever since then. And now we're in this point where, I mean, we're still in the early days of it, and it's massive. And I feel like, so for one thing, it's like, I would feel terrible sitting on the sidelines and just like watching all this go by when we're in one of the most interesting technical times in the history of the world. In terms of how to pick what to do, it's funny, people don't believe this, but I would actually prefer not to do a startup. It's just, no matter who you are.
Even though you've done like 4 or 5 now.
Yeah, no matter how much money you've raised and what you've done, it's always hard because you're always doing something. You're either resegmenting a market and you're going against an incumbent, or you're doing something that's new that people are unsure if it's going to be big or if it's going to matter. So like, it's just so hard to find believers. I mean, think about this. Even your big public companies, Tesla and Nvidia, about half the market disagrees with where they're going and is shorting the stock or selling the stock.
Yeah.
So now whittle that down to something that you have no data about, and it's crazy. And so it's really, really hard. But I spent some time in VC, and I love investing. I loved listening to all the ideas and picking the winners. But like, like running a VC fund is actually a lot more than that. There's a lot of like LP communications and financial analysis, and you get bogged down in a lot of legal things in these deals. And
how long did you do that, Rob? How long were you doing VC?
I mean, I've been parts of funds as like venture partners and stuff part-time for a long time, but I did it full-time for 2.5 years. And there was a lot to love about it. It's a super flexible job, which is cool. And you can make a lot of money if you're really, really good at it, but it takes a long time. You're 6 or 7 or 8 years in before you know if you're any good. And and it's just and then it actually gets a little bit repetitive. Like early stage founders typically need the same kind of thing. You spend a lot of time just introducing people to upstream VCs and stuff like that I didn't like. But the bigger problem for me was when you're an operator and you're doing something in a business every day, every week, every month, you have goals, you're trying to move forward. Sometimes they turn out not to be the right things, but at least you feel like you're making progress. There's a lot of times in VCs, you go and you talk to a bunch of companies and you do some research on some spaces, and it's like 3 months and you're like, I've done nothing except rule out a bunch of investment opportunities, right? And that didn't feel as good with my personality. And so and then I also got a little bit burnout on the early stage stuff. I started doing, I'm an advisor to a hedge fund now on AI, and it's a lot more fun to help them think about, there's so much more information on public market stuff. And so the reason I chose Neurometric was it just seemed to have this combination. Basically, my rule was I would go back and be an operator if I felt like something could be really, really big.
Okay.
And I think AI inference as a category is going to be one of the biggest markets in the history of the world, because you're effectively taking all these workloads that humans do, and right now we can automate realistically 4, 5, 6% of them, right? And this is already a multi-$100 billion market.
Yeah.
Think about what it's going to mean when you can automate 80% of them. Like, I don't know if we'll ever get to 100%. It might be a really long way away, but you've got a good 10, 12, 15-year path to get to that 80%. And these are going to be multi-trillion-dollar markets, taking these human workflows and converting them into compute workflows. And you need a whole bunch of new compute and infrastructure and everything to manage that. And so what that means as an entrepreneur or an investor is it means your edge cases and your small, narrow niche parts of the market can be billion-dollar outcomes, and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's so I decided to do it because it's very intellectually stimulating. It was a big opportunity, and I felt like I was able to put together a team that would approach this very differently than what a lot of people have been doing.
Where did you start? Was there already a founder and you joined, or was this an idea that you started with? You're like, I need to go build a team to do this thing.
Yeah, I started. So the initial idea wasn't what we ended up doing, right? The initial idea. So I'm a hardware engineer by training. I used to do ASIC design. So I used to design computer chips for military and space applications, and a lot of people don't know this, but for most of history, when I came out of school in the early 2000s, hardware was kind of dead, right? Processors were getting faster, programming languages were getting higher, and levels of abstraction. And so there's just everybody went into software and not hardware over the next 20 years. what happened was these AI workloads came along, and people don't understand how much these AI workloads even today stress the cutting edge GPUs. They're not nearly as efficient as they could be. And so these compute workloads, and they're getting worse and worse. It's led to this explosion in hardware innovation. There are these chips like Samba Nova and Cerebrus, and edge chips like Mythic and Positron, and all this stuff. And so as a hardware geek, it's like amazing. It's an amazing time. So last fall, fall of 2024, my last company got acquired. It was a so-so exit. And I was looking at what to do next. And Cerebrus had filed for their IPO. They haven't since gone public yet. But a family office asked me some questions about it. Would I take a look at it for them? And it led me down this path of studying these AI accelerators. Yeah. So I pulled in one of my old co-founders, a guy named Byron Galbraith, who happens to be an expert like CUDA programmer. So when you hear about the language that CUDA is the moat for NVIDIA, people say that's the language that people use to take your model and get it on the hardware and tell it what to do on the GPU. Byron was working with CUDA back in like version 0.2, a decade ago or more.
Yeah, so that's like 10 years ago, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and so we started looking at these hardware accelerators, and we initially thought, companies are going to use some GPUs and some of these other accelerators, and they're going to need a way to work through all that. So we were going to build sort of a system that managed that. And Byron kept asking me like, okay, but like why is it, the question really became, why is inference going to grow that you're going to continue to need these? And that's when we kept saying, he kept asking me, and every time I would say, it's these inference algorithms, test time compute, post-training algorithms, where they go by several different names. They all mean the same thing, which is the way you run the models and the things you can do at that point in time. Okay. And after like the third time I said it, I paused and I went, wait, is that where we should be focused? And and it's like, I was like, let's pull on that thread, right? So we pulled on that thread, and then we were working with this hardware guy, Dave Roshwork, who built a company years ago that built a $9 CPU. So he's like an optimization nerd for hardware and a supercomputer guy. And then the three of us found another friend that I had, Calvin Cooper, who I'd gotten introduced through a mutual friend. And he and I were just kicking around ideas as I was working through all this. And he was being super helpful. He's the least technical of the three of us, but so he sort of does all the business ops now. But and so we just started going down this thread of model management, the algorithms, the thinking algorithms, post-training algorithms that you can run on the models, and like where all this stuff is going to go, and decided to build Neurometric. So it was really sort of like, I would say it was almost like wrong idea, brought in a founder helped me get to the right, co-founder helped me get to the right idea.
That's pretty common though, right? Like most startups, find that they sort of have directionally maybe the right idea, but by the time they get to market, that it looks a lot different.
Yeah, it's like going on vacation, right? It's never exactly what you think it's going to be. You always have it in your mind like it's going to be this, and here's what we're going to do, and then then it rains one day, and it's cold one day, and stuff like that, and you end up shifting a little bit, and so it's kind of like in the general vicinity of what you meant to do, but not like you planned. And I think startups are often a lot like that.
Okay. Well, another one of the things I love about you is that you're a little bit of a contrarian. Yeah. And this comes across in a number of ways. And look, to be completely, complete disclosure here, like I am too. Like I'm the person that my friends and family, drive them a little bit crazy. Like, cause they'll say A, and whatever A is, like I always say, but what about B? Yeah. And so, it sort of makes you annoying to have as a friend or a family member, but it makes you good as a journalist. So it works out all right for me. But I think it also makes you good as a founder, or as somebody who's really trying to get to the truth about something, right? Get to what do we actually know? How do we know it? What are we trying to accomplish, and how do we cut through the noise to get to what's real? And so you mentioned, so we talked recently about this new thing that Neurometric AI released, which was this leaderboard for thinking algorithms. Yes. And you gave me a great example, and this maybe I should back up. So we wrote about this on the Deep View, so you can go and read the story about the Neurometric AI leaderboard. You can also go to leaderboard.neurometric.ai, right? Right. So the thing is your main idea here is that the future of this is going to be more these smaller, more specific models are going to be better for AI workloads. They're going to be a lot more efficient, can potentially make your workloads faster and less expensive. So
Yes.
I'm boiling it down. We can unpack that. But what I wanted to get to, in sort of your way of sort of being a contrarian thinker, is you said that, look, think of it like a human being. And who do you ask questions to? So say that for me again, because I loved that analogy, and that for me solidified it, right? Of like, okay, now I understand what we're talking about.
It's the best, when you think about where AI is going to go, the best place to look is our only current model of high level intelligence, which is human beings. So I always start with like, okay, well, what does a human do it, right? And when you look at it through that lens, you realize a lot of things. Like we could talk about, like before we talk about the models, we can talk about people are having this problem of like, how do you evaluate AI and know if it's good or not, right? Like if I tell this thing to go off and write a research report, is the research report good? How do I know? Well, so I look at it on the human side, and I go, well, how do we know if a human does it good? You're like, well, somebody reviews it. Well, that's probably going to happen in the AI world, right? And so I always use humans as parallels. And when you do that, you start to realize that like AI is not going to solve every problem, because there's still these things that are, the world's probabilistic and humans still have problems, and there's some things that are just hard and ill-defined. So from the model perspective, I always tell people, so there's this point of view, a lot of investors have had this point of view, and a lot of the AI market had this point of view until maybe late summer 2025, of like one model to rule the ball. You're going to build one model and it knows everything. But in every physical system in the world, there is this concept of like diseconomies of scale, right? Which is as things get bigger, you lose something sometimes.
Yep.
And so what starts to happen is like, running a big model, a query might be, 800 milliseconds time to first token. Whereas with the small model, it might be, 1/10 that, right? 1/5 that, something much faster. And so I always tell people, like, again, use the human analogy. Think about the smartest person you know. And I can tell you, for me, that's Stephen Wolfram. I've met Stephen Wolfram several times.
Wow.
He got his PhD from Caltech at 19. He is a brilliant, brilliant human being on any topic you ask him about. It's like, would you hire Stephen Wolfram to clean your bathroom? Would you hire Stephen Wolfram even to do your accounting? Like, no. There are people who are specialized in those things and are better at those things. And
did you ask Stephen Wolfram to predict who's going to win the Heisman Trophy, right? Like,
yeah, no, exactly. It's not his thing. And so, and even if you could build a model that had all that in it, that model has all this knowledge that it doesn't really need. So like, why run that big expensive model every time if you just want to predict the Heisman, right? Run your smaller sports model. And so then the question is like, well, why didn't we just start with the smaller task models? Well, because it wouldn't have made sense, because if I give you like one simple task model, like, so what? That doesn't change your life, right? So these big general models are the place where you can start and be like, oh, that's cool. I can do this, I can do that. And then what happens, if you look at the AI maturity curve that we see, people are going to build the way you build teams in a company. I mean, how do you start a company? It's just you, right? You're starting your web design company, and it's you. You do the sales, you do the marketing, you do the web design, you do the accounting, you do whatever. And then first thing you do is you offload the stuff you don't like. You offload the accounting, then you offload the marketing, then you hire more designers. This is what the models are going to do. And so from an AI maturity perspective, we see people start with one big model. They get their product up and working. They're hitting GPT-5 or Anthropic or something. And then they start to peel off the pieces where they're either like, well, that's not cost effective to really just send that to that model and pay that, or they have latency issues. It's too slow. They need faster response. Or sometimes with these models, you can get better accuracy. And what's interesting about moving to small language models or other similar task-focused models, let's call them, is that they could literally be the trifecta, which if you have a well-defined task, they could be faster and cheaper and more accurate than using the biggest and best models. And so, when we started going down that path, I was like, well, this is something that we've got to help people be able to do, because everybody is going to want to do this. And it also has the added advantage that if you're a big company and there's certain tasks and workflows that you would rather not turn over to all the big model vendors in the world, like, great, now you can have, we would help you create your own small task-specific models and workflows and systems that manage these things.
That's a great place to be as a business. Like, I'm going to go in and so you have an instant ROI. I'm going to help you build something faster, more accurate, and cheaper. And whatever somebody's going to pay you is likely they're going to get back, right, at a certain multiple of that.
Yeah, exactly. And it depends on, it varies a lot depending on what the company wants, because some people, like, they don't care about latency, right? They have a workload that just takes, 9 minutes on an AI model. And, if you can shave that to 7, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference. Okay. But sometimes it can make a huge difference, right? Particularly if you're looking at cost. I mean, from a cost perspective, you're looking at typically like a 90% drop to move from a large language model to a small language model that's specific to your use case. And so not every business for every case is going to, maybe like if your business does $100 million and you're like, and we spend $20,000 a year on AI models, you don't really need to cut that back. But, I can tell you, I don't know if I can say this. I don't know if I can name the company publicly, but there's a publicly traded company that we spoke to who's like, we spend over $10 million a month on inference.
Oof.
And so if you can shave 2%, like, yes, that we'll take it, right? Like,
take it, yeah.
Yeah. And we think, we're going to work with them. We'll probably be able to shave 50%. So
it's just that inference there's going to be so much that goes into inference, because that's at the level of like making queries and getting back results, primarily. And that's, we know now that even just OpenAI alone, has hit over 800 billion weekly users. So, and this thing's only been around for 3 years. We're still just like at the very, very early innings of this, and businesses, even less so. And so the challenge there is, just like you said, is you can spend a lot of money really quickly on these things. If you're a business, you can your inference costs can start stacking up really fast. I mean, you mentioned a public company that's spending 10 million a month.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, you see this sometimes, like if you're active on Reddit on the like AI forums, a lot of times you'll see these developers who they'll go out and they'll build something, and suddenly they'll complain that like, wow, it's my app is only serving a few users and is costing me $800 a day, $2,000 a day.
Wow.
Stuff like that. Particularly as you've had but there's these forces, right, that compete. There's this natural force where hardware's getting more efficient, models are getting more efficient, and there's a cost curve drop that we see similar to what we saw with storage. But also we're developing better algorithms that think longer and do more, and so those forces are fighting, right? So when you're and so it's still growing quite a bit, but the net impact is going to be like, as the cost of inference drops, we're going to use it for more tasks.
Yep.
It's like Jevons paradox or whatever they call it. It's gonna stimulate a lot of demand.
So that's the bet that you're making with Neurometric, is that you can. So in the leaderboard that you created, you built this on Amazon Bedrock, and you took the models that were available on Bedrock, and you used CRM Arena, which is a really applied AI business tasks essentially, because you wanted to measure it based on that. And then you sort of came up with the leaderboard. Here's who does well on this, here who does well on that. And we put it in the story because, of course, people care about the horse race. We're like, OpenAI's, 120B, 120B model, GPT OSS was number one. So people care about that. And then the Chinese models were next, like DeepSeek R1 and Quen.
Yeah.
So great. But what you said, where it really gets interesting, though, is that you found that was the best at the most tasks, but it was also terrible at some tasks. And some of the smaller models were much more efficient at certain kinds of things. So break that down a little bit, unpack that a little bit, because that's really interesting. And that's where kind of the rubber meets the road. And then we'll get to like how you're going to sort of next create a product to help companies then really optimize their inference cost, which is, I know the crux of what you're building.
Right. So the purpose of the leaderboard was, we talked earlier about the world being noisy and it's hard to get people's attention. And so the typical way you would build a startup is you'd build a product, you'd make some people like it, and then you go figure out how to market it. I wanted to make sure we started with some marketing because I wanted to already have more attention, and I knew we would find things. We'll find the right lane in the inference space to swim in. And so we built this leaderboard to make the world aware, because I wouldn't say it's a contrarian position, but it's a non-intuitive position that the performance between these models, particularly when you use these different thinking algorithms on top of them, right? So for the people that aren't familiar with it, you have the same model, but maybe there's 3 different ways that you probe that model and ask it a question, and you might get high variability in your answers on a per task basis. And so what we were showing is like, well, if you really want to optimize your system, you shouldn't use 1 model, you should use 3 to 5 models, and you would probably get, and they would be different depending on the tasks that you're trying to do as a business. And so the leaderboard is about educating the population on that, and then and then also being able to attract the right customers who then come to us and say, well, can you run this leaderboard analysis on our data? And I think I think the way that this will expand and what you'll see over time is we will do more and more task-based. You'll see things other than CRM Arena that are coming. You'll see new kinds of metrics because we've already seen there's some data that we haven't released yet, right? That shows stuff like if you run the same model, GPT OSS 120B on 2 different systems, right? Amazon and GCP, right? Together AI, Fireworks, whatever. It's doesn't always run the same. You don't always get the same accuracy. You definitely don't get the same latency. So the hardware configuration matters. There's a whole bunch of things in there. And so what we're ultimately trying to do is help people design their AI systems because people want to optimize for they have all kinds of different constraints and requirements, right? And so being able to navigate that is going to be really important. And then what that'll lead into, what's coming in January, is it is a tool that monitors your AI traffic, your AI workloads, right? Your prompts that go in and out, and constantly gives you a dashboard of, hey, prompts that look like this, categories of tasks that you're doing on AI could be improved, maybe save money, maybe get better performance, moving to these models with these thinking algorithms. And these thinking algorithms, these post-training algorithms, is our really unique contribution to the industry for this.
So Rob, if I'm a CIO, and I hear this, I'm probably going to say to you, all right, Rob, that all sounds good, but how is it? How am I going to keep track of all the different models and which ones I should use for which? Because the complexity gets like really crazy really quickly, right? Especially if you're talking about the same model even sometimes has different results based on, and I know you've explained it on the leaderboard itself. You're doing best event and
chain of thought and
chain of thought.
Beam search is coming. Yeah.
So what do you do if somebody says that's interesting? I would love to do it, but it's just like super complex for me to try to deal with all that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So one of the tools we're coming out with is going to help manage some of that. But there's going to be a lot of like obviously like if you have 86 tasks, you don't want to use 86 different model and system combinations, right? Some of them can double up. And so the decision you have to make as a systems designer that we try to help with is to give you the education to look at it and go, well, given our constraints and everything else we want to do, we can use up to 3 models, or we can use up to 12 models or whatever, or these 3 tasks need to be optimized and everything else can kind of go to GPT-5. And so we sort of help people, think through some of that. And the tool that we're coming out with that provides that insight, the next step in that tool, and this will be later in the year, probably like late spring, early summer, but the next step in that tool will be to manage that for you. So not just make the recommendation of, hey, you can use Llama 3370B and that might help with this task. Well, in January or February, if you use our tool, you're going to have to go, if that's a recommendation, you're going to have to pull that out of Together AI or whatever, wherever you run your models and do it. But by the late spring, early summer, we'll be able to do that for you as well, right? So it's
you'll automate it basically a little bit.
Yeah, because because the other thing that's happening in the industry is there just aren't enough people that know how to do this stuff.
Okay.
Right. And so you have to build that. This was something we got wrong in the beginning. I was like, we're going to build the dashboard that has all the knobs and whatever. Those have to be hidden. Actually, very few people want to use those. Most companies are like, do this for me, figure it out for me, manage it for me, because hiring AI engineers, even within the AI engineering ecosystem, the number of people that understand all the layers of the stack and how they flow together, it's very small. And so so we'll manage a lot of that dynamically for people over time.
That's great. So that's what Neurometric AI, you're really trying to go and sort of manage at the systems level, something that's going to do this sort of the promises can help you figure out how to, get the right model, the right thinking algorithms to save you money, be more accurate, be more efficient, but cost less.
Yeah. And the other thing is, like, I think when you look out 2 years, I think working at the systems level is going to give a lot of really unique opportunities to do things like, so imagine now a system where you have 7 models, and instead of just passing a prompt into the model of, here's a customer support workload or a code documentation workload or whatever, in addition to that, you're going to pass in data of, and here's what's going on with all the other models in the system right now. So you're going to give more environment. They with the AI, they take your text or they take whatever and they put it in vector space, mathematical vector space, and they use that to create these embeddings that they put into the model. So now imagine having systems level embeddings where each model is aware of everything else that has just gone on and is going on within the system. Like, I think these things are how you're going to really build more intelligent systems over time, is by extrapolating intelligence to that systems layer.
So that's really a big mission. It sounds sort of specific, but at the end of the day, like that's a really big thing to chase. I want to talk a little bit about the broader industry, because you mentioned like you have this exposure. You've been working on AI for a decade, so you have this exposure to the full stack, right? And you have a lot of hot takes on social media about
about everything,
things.
Not just AI, but yeah.
That's true. That's fair, about everything. And so I would love to dig into some of these things, because I'll be honest, the reason that I came to work at the Deep View was this. When I was at ZDNet before, I was focused on AI, but I was, I only could spend so much of my time on it. But looking at the AI landscape, there are so many conflicting signals. It's so confusing. It's so many diametrically opposed views.
Right.
And really what the Deep View is trying to do is like, we're going to help you sort through all of that.
Yeah.
And when I looked at that, I said, that's a 10-year mission that's going to be worth doing, because when there's a lot of confusion, when there's a lot of disruption, when there's a lot of mixed signals, like that's a journalist, like that's catnip. Like there's a lot of great work for us to do, right, to help people figure it out. So
makes sense.
I wanted to, there's all kinds of mixed signals on things. I would love to get your take on a bunch of them. So let's start with hardware, because you mentioned like you are a hardware engineer, you understand these things. And one of the things that's the hottest topics out there right now, you mentioned it earlier, was NVIDIA and GPUs and CUDA. What we've heard is NVIDIA has so much demand right now that they have multiple people that are willing to buy every GPU they make. Like, they just can't make enough to sell all the orders that they've got for them, and that's going out years, right, at this point. So I see these stories, for example, that are like, okay, Google trained all of its Gemini 3 model on its own TPUs, and now it might sell some of them to Amazon. And same thing, like Amazon at their conference, or AWS reInvent conference, they mentioned Trainium. So they're making some of their own chips in that. And so the stories become like, oh no, like these companies are going to tick off NVIDIA by buying some of these or buying some of those. But the truth is not that. The truth is like they couldn't buy them from NVIDIA if they wanted. These people are just wanting to buy anything, right, that they can get their hands on. So, but there's all these. There's what I see as a lot of noise about all of these things, and I would love your take on all of that. You mentioned it earlier, and then so your take on sort of the horse race of all of the GPUs and the hardware makers. And then with that, like if these things do get optimized and smaller models become a thing, does that reduce some of the demand? And is it just that there's so much demand that it's going to still go on for years? Those are a couple questions.
Yeah, it's a great topic area to dig into. And I will tell you, like my personal opinion, like obviously this can't go on forever just with NVIDIA getting to, $50 trillion market cap or whatever. But I think it's still going to go on for quite a while, because as you said, at the time we're recording this podcast, NVIDIA stock has been flat to slightly down because of the TPU announcement, that Google's selling those, I think, to Meta, maybe it said, and to Anthropic and all that. Yeah. One of the things you have to understand is TPUs are much more difficult to use. So AMD GPUs with ROCm, which is their software, and then NVIDIA GPUs with CUDA are the two most mature ecosystems for getting into, getting your model onto a chip and having it run. And that's hard to do because these models are very, very, very large by computer program standards. And so if you look at what's happened, and also Amazon announced their Trainium 3 chips again, similar difficult software stack. So the way this is going to play out, I think, over 2026, I think NVIDIA will be popping again in 2026, because what's happening is TPUs really, and Trainium chips from Amazon are really only going to be available to the most sophisticated customers in 2026. It's going to be hard for anybody else to use them. A startup might invest the time to learn and do it, but your average company that's buying GPUs to train common model tasks are not going to be able to do it. I also think related to that, the sort of Michael Burry stuff about, hey, these guys aren't doing depreciation right for these chips. Well, think about this. Google's version 1 of their TPU, and I think they're on version 7, maybe 6, maybe 7. All the teenagers out there love that I just said that. If you're teenage kids, you get that joke.
Right.
But
6, 7, there you go.
Yeah, but and so their version 1 TPUs are still fully in use. It's like 6, 7, 8 years later, and 100% maxed out, going all the time.
Wow.
And the stuff that we're doing, and companies like us that are helping people use smaller models, build smaller language models and all that, that's what's going to fill up the slower hardware, right?
Okay.
And the cheaper hardware and the older hardware. And so, yeah, it's not going to run the most cutting edge models, but right now, I haven't seen numbers on this, so I'm making this up, but my guess is 95% of AI workloads go to cutting edge models, and they don't have to. And I think when you're going to look around in 7 years, I think those cutting edge models are going to run 10 or 15% of AI workloads. So I really believe that, number one, NVIDIA is going to be fine, at least for the next year or 2 or 3. And I just think there's so much demand for this. The other mistake people make, the mistake that a lot of the analysts make early on, is they look around and they go, well, the whole worldwide software market's like $600 billion or whatever the number is. Well, that's how can NVIDIA be worth $5 trillion, and how can AI, all this infrastructure, get so big? And it's like, no. But like the labor market just in the United States is like $9 or $10 trillion, and maybe probably 3 or 4 times that worldwide. Like when you start eating into that, it makes total sense how you could have $4 trillion worth of software spend that is effectively AI eating into labor, making it all more efficient. So I actually do not, at the time we're recording this podcast in December, I don't think we're in a bubble. I think we're starting to be at the beginning of the bubbly phase.
Okay. It's just beginning, the bubbly stuff.
That
brings me to my next favorite topic that I want to ask you about, which is the massive data center build out, right? And really this is it's OpenAI is the headliner for it, but it's not just OpenAI, right? Like the EU just invested a bunch. Like they're gonna essentially try to 6x the current amount of data center capacity in all of EU, which isn't a lot, to be clear. But they're far behind the U.S. and China. But there's also lots of other companies and even startups that are trying to do the neo clouds and other things. So I feel in my bones that the capacity build out feels premature, because what if all of a sudden, not all of the sudden, but if over time you optimize these workloads and you don't need as much, and we build out all this capacity, what does that mean? So I would love your take on the data center build out.
It's a really challenging question, because these things happen on such different timescales, right? You have to get power to these places, and that takes longer to build than a data center, like a new power source. And the data center takes a while, and the chip takes a while in there, but you get progressively faster as you go down that path. And so you have these competing things where, like, I think the power consumption is most behind. That's the biggest problem. I was at a conference in San Jose, the AI Infrastructure Conference, back in September, October of this year. And I think it was the Facebook head of infrastructure basically said there's almost no places left to go get a gigawatt of power, which is what you really need to run one of these big data centers.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be the main constraint. And I think that build out when people are talking about nuclear power and adding all kinds more, I think that's going to be beneficial because it's going to happen slow enough that we're going to be happy about it, even if there's some bumps along the road. The data centers themselves, I think, will be a little bit have some mild bubbles, ups and downs. Like I do think it's the right trend. We might be building a little too fast, but we are going to need a lot of them. But I would expect to see more ups and downs in that over the next 5 to 7 years than in the power market. And then obviously the chips are going to keep going for a while. But I think what'll happen is that curve that looks like this for your power needs will just start to shift down when you look at the stuff that Neurometric and other companies are doing around small language models. Because people will realize, wow, we can scale, to double the amount of, so the metric people look at is intelligence per watt.
Yep.
And if you look at intelligence per watt, that is going to get more efficient because it's getting more efficient at the chip level, at the rack level, at the data center level, all that. So, and companies like us are going to help with that. And so that curve is going to dampen slowly. And if, to double the amount of intelligence you need in the world in AI, you're not going to have to double everything else. You're going to be able to, maybe use 60% more power and 45% more data centers. And so I think those things will all probably catch up, probably not next year, but probably 2027, you'll start to see how those things are realigning.
Well, as I'm fishing for hot takes, another one I want to ask about is OpenAI versus Anthropic, because you understand business, finance, startups, all of these things, and also you understand the AI ecosystem so well. It seems to me, my take is that they are just taking such diametrically opposed paths of building, and Anthropic is building this much more enterprise, business, which there's a lot of money there, is sort of slower, more methodical, and they're trying to build a profitable company, right, over time. And then OpenAI is doing this sort of signing crazy deals, like making amazing commitments for data center capacity, almost like it's going out of style, which, like you said, like it's constrained. So there's a there. But they're betting on a consumer market, by and large, that there's going to be a consumer market for AI, which today is still. There's a bunch of people paying for it. So there is a there. It's not like nothing. It's not pets.com or something 20 years ago, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
But it is a really different path between those two. What's your take on that? How close to the mark is that? And what do you think?
I was at an AI dinner put on by a New York-based tech bank maybe 7 months ago, and there was like 20 of us in the room, all AI people, and they went around and they said, "What's your hot take?" And most people don't actually want to give a hot take because they're embarrassed or whatever. And it got to me, I was like person 7, and I said I would short open AI if there was a way to do it. And
wow.
And 2 or 3 people were like, yes, and here's why, and other people like, no, they're going to win everything. So it was, and the guy came up to me after, he's like, this is why I invite you to the dinners. It's like, it was amazing conversation, right? And really, really good discussion and debate.
Yes.
I think the way I would frame it is OpenAI is taking the riskiest approach, and they're trying to get their hooks in all parts of the ecosystem, and that's very expensive at this stage. And as a result, they can't have a misstep. If they have a misstep, which it already looks like they might have with Altman's code red thing, but things could come crashing down, and they could end up being the MySpace to Facebook or whatever. And now Microsoft owns a big chunk of them. It was roughly half. I think it's like 25 or 30, 27% after the conversion rate. And so I'm sure Microsoft would buy it, or some other people, or maybe Oracle would try to buy them. I think OpenAI would live on, is what I would say, but they're going to have to take a more Anthropic, they've looked at this as a race. And I think what we've learned that surprised everybody, myself included, is I don't think it's a race as much as people think. There's this, if you had asked me 2 or 3 years ago, about AGI, I would have been one of these people that was like, oh man, if you get there a week before somebody else, then your model can improve itself faster, and and then you run away with the world and you own everything. I don't believe that now for a whole bunch of reasons. And I think we've seen that, right? When ChatGPT came out, everybody thought game over. OpenAI won.
Yep.
And then lots of people have caught up. The Chinese open source models have passed us in a lot of, the US ones in a lot of levels of performance. Anthropic's clearly caught up. Those are very good models. Gemini's in the lead right now. Google's caught up.
Yep.
Google has the assets and is so deeply vertically integrated on AI and has the talent that, the people I know that have left OpenAI to go work for Google will say, but Google's got 1,000 times more compute than OpenAI has. Like let's say OpenAI solves the AGI problem first, and their smart AGI is trying to train better models of itself. If Google can figure that out in a matter of weeks, it can spin up way more compute and do the same thing. So it's, and surpass them again. So I think OpenAI is starting to realize they were playing the wrong game. And so the question is, now can they recover? But yeah, I think if they were going to IPO, I would not buy the stock at the current valuations. And that's just me. And I will tell you that I personally actually shorted Oracle for a while when the announcement came out with Oracle and OpenAI's thing, because my thought was, if OpenAI stumbles and people worry about their commitments, Oracle's the one that's going to have the hardest. That's the one they'll have the hardest time dealing with. And so that turned out to be a good idea. So,
It did. Interesting. Well, you did not fail to deliver on the hot take. Much appreciated. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum, though, Robin. Talk about AI startups, because you looked at them as a VC. You understand and are in the ecosystem. You know lots of other founders. You've been in it for a decade. As you look around and you see other founders doing things and starting things, what are you looking at and saying, like, those are good ideas, and what are you looking at and saying, like, oof, that the risk there seems a little bit crazy, and I don't necessarily understand what you're trying to do?
I still write a newsletter, a Substack on investing in AI, and I've written some things in the last year. Sequoia came out and said, the app layer is where you're going to make money with AI. And I basically wrote a post that said, this is why I disagree with Sequoia's thesis. I think it's the infrastructure layer. So first of all, I would say anything that I say about a specific category, there's always exceptions. There's always pockets to make money, even in crappy industries and bad pockets. But as a whole, the two areas that I would not play would be the application layer is going to become more fragmented and more competitive. And the reason it is because it's easier to write code. And so the calculation then for a buyer is, well, why do you buy CRM from Salesforce? Because it would take you forever to write your own CRM. So some really big companies with large teams will do it so you can get exactly what you want. But if you could write your own CRM in 6 weeks with a team of 2 or 3 people, which is what we're going to get to, like, would you still buy Salesforce? Maybe you need all the add-ons in the ecosystem and your use cases are complicated or whatever. But if you can get exactly what you want and just build it, and AI coders can maintain it for you. So if that happens, you're going to start seeing a lot more competition at every application category. Yep. Which doesn't mean you can't make money, but it means you just have to make smaller companies that are funded less, that are and run a certain way. And you're not going to see these big, $10 billion publicly traded SaaS behemoths in the application space that you've seen. So I'm much more positive on the infrastructure layer. And then these agents, right? I think there will be some niche vertical agent use cases that make money, but by and large, I think the big companies are going to win that. It's a big problem in the AI space, which is so attention and distribution, customer acquisition is getting harder for everybody, whatever business you're in, because the world's noisier than it used to be. AI is making it easier to be even noisier and noisier. Yep. And so people have to adapt, right? This is why you came to the Deep View, because you guys are trying to give, like you said earlier, like people special, like here's how to make sense of the noise. Yep. So people are going to come back to authenticity and all that, but a lot of these things that's an advantage to the large companies. You also need to be able to afford a lot of compute. You need to be able to, get interesting data sets. You need to be able to hire AI talent. I mean, when I got into startups 15, 20 years ago, you could take, like, a senior engineer might make $170,000, and you could probably, in 2008, 2007, and you could probably get that person to take a $20,000 or $30,000 pay cut to come work for you and take some equity. But now, as a startup, I mean, some of those same types of people if they work at Amazon or Google might make $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, plus they've got a stock package on top of that. It's like, sure, they would be willing to take a pay cut to come work for a startup, but they're not going to take it in, if you want to move from like, well, I could make 400 instead of 500, that's your startup investors are going to go, you can't pay somebody that at a startup. So that's also making it hard for startups. The talent and the pay that people have now is crazy in the AI space. And so the big companies have a lot of advantages. And I think particularly in the agentic space, there, when you look at like, how do you compete against Agentforce from Salesforce? I mean, Amazon and Google, Microsoft has fully fledged agents, and Amazon and Google have platforms that help you build them. Not that there aren't some opportunities, but there's hundreds, if not thousands of companies, startup companies building agents. And I think that's going to be difficult space.
Speaking of spaces, let's talk about physical spaces a little bit. You also have this other thing that you do on the side, in addition to your newsletter and this little startup that you're running, which is, I'm sure, taking a lot of time. Yeah. And you're about to launch and all that, or about to publicly. You do AI in NYC. You're based in New York, yep. which is great. Sorry, AI in New York. And I spend a lot of time in New York. I love the ecosystem, the tech ecosystem in New York, and obviously there's a lot of media stuff there too. So, tell me about this. How did you get involved with that? What are you trying to do there? What's that look like?
Well, the AI ecosystem in New York is fantastic, but it's very fragmented, and a lot of the parties don't know each other. The robotics people don't always. There's a group that come out of sort of data science, out of finance, and then there's your more traditional people, and they come out of the big tech companies like Mongo and Datadog. And I just had this podcast I did for fun and to meet people called AI Innovators, had a couple thousand listeners. And it just felt, I started doing it 5 or 6 years ago, and it just felt stale because there's a million people doing AI podcasts now. I thought, well, how can I stand out? So the guy that was producing the podcast said, I think you need something like the All In podcast, but for AI, where you talk about the news and you have a couple of hosts and you riff on each other. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, oh, let's do that live in studio with people in New York. So let's just focus on New York, what's going on here, because it's really the applied AI hub of the world, I think, compared to like, obviously there's a ton going on the West Coast, but West Coast people are still very focused on AGI. So we poke fun at them sometimes on the show. I mean, I have a ton of friends out there, but like we poke fun at the how obsessed they are with AGI and ASI. And then there's our show that's about to come out. We just had Doug O'Loughlin on from Semi-Analysis, which is a big semiconductor newsletter, and he just moved to New York this summer, and he's like, all of our customers are here in like a 3-mile radius in Manhattan, and so it's a really, really great place to build. It's a great quality of life, particularly if you're young. I don't know. I would want to raise young children here. Could be a little bit challenging, but everything else about New York is fantastic. And so the show, we have guests on. It's not just all tech startups or tech people. I mean, we had people on that run a nonprofit that helps, run a group that helps nonprofits use AI in New York, and there's people like that. We're going to have our music for the theme show was written by the keyboardist for Vampire Weekend. So he and his and I tried to create it with like Suno and some of these AI tools. I just couldn't get what I wanted. So he's going to come on with his manager hopefully at some point, and we're going to talk about the impacts of AI on the music industry. So we're really trying to be the center hub of everything in the city. Government AI, how does NYPD use AI? How do the New York Knicks use AI? Those are the people that we're trying to get on, and not just startups, because it's there's just so much going on. And I just think for a casual listener who may not listen to every podcast, but wants to see what's going on, and then we put some New York flavor in there. We always ask a New York centric question at the end, like I think last time was, what's your least favorite subway line? Yeah. And then we post a lot of outtakes, because we start filming when we arrive and start set up. We have all these random conversations that sometimes make it into the clips of the show.
That's awesome. Sounds like a lot of fun. And
it is.
You've got multiple folks. How long have you been doing it? Where do people find it if they want to listen to it? Yeah.
We've been doing it for about 3 months now, and it's good. We're getting about 20,000 listens across all platforms. Figuring out your podcast metrics. This is something somebody should fix with AI. It's a little bit hard because we're on Spotify, yep. We're on Apple YouTube. Podcasts. We do the video show on YouTube. You can watch it because we do record video, and so it's just AI and NYC on any of those platforms, and it'll normally come up.
That's awesome. How about, Rob, let's talk about just the AI ecosystem in general. Are you glad you jumped back into operating? You mentioned this is such a time and unique time. Obviously, for me, this is why I decided this is what I wanted to be thinking about and reading about and talking about all day long. So my thesis is pretty similar.
Yeah.
How are you thinking about what the next few years look like, in the AI ecosystem, and how are you kind of calibrating for what's next?
Well, I agree with you that it's going to be massive. It's going to be the place to be. There's still a ton of innovation coming. We're still in I think you said at the beginning, 10 years. Like, I think we're probably 10 years away from starting to have a sense of what this is all going to look like at scale.
Okay.
And when it's going to slow down. I do think it's going to slow down, and I do think at some point we will have to deal with the fact that I think we're a long way from AI taking a lot of the jobs, but I think that day's going to come. And part of the reason I wanted to come back in and be an operator as well is that there needs to be, I mean, you and I, you're still in the Midwest. I spent a lot of time there. Like, the tech industry needs a little bit of Midwestern values and sometimes, right? It's there used to be these jokes of why are in the 2010s era, it's like, why are all the best and brightest computer scientists in the world at Google and Facebook trying to get us to click on more ads?
Yeah.
And now those minds get to tackle some more interesting problems. And I think you need a set of entrepreneurs and leaders and people who don't just, I think tech has sometimes abdicated its role in morality and ethics by just saying, like, well, you can use it however you want. Yeah, that's true, right? You can do that. I can stab somebody with a kitchen fork, but like, you can use things anyway, but that doesn't mean that these things don't lend themselves to certain uses more than others. And yep. I think we need more pragmatists at the helm. And I'm hoping that we can not just have an awesome company and have a lot of fun and it's all intellectually stimulating, but be a force to help companies navigate and balance out against, there's a risk here that you end up with like 3 companies that matter in the whole world and they own the AI and do everything. And I think by supporting open source AI and small language models and helping companies be able to keep their IP and easily make models for their IP and their knowledge workflows together, I think, like, I don't know, it sounds cheesy, but there's like a little bit of good in that, I think. And so, it's just, I mean, I'm having the time of my life. My kids are older, so I'm one of those few people in their 40s that like doesn't have young kids because I got married and divorced so young, and so it's like, I can work like I was in my early 20s again, and I am, and I love it, and it's super challenging, and so this is an awesome time.
It's where you want to be.
Yeah.
Can't ask for much more than that in life, like to spend your time on the things that you want to spend the time on.
Yeah, exactly.
Very good. Well, Rob, thanks so much for being on the show. Great catching up with you. Great talking to you, my friend. And we will talk again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.